All right, friends, so we'll begin with this question right here. I would love to hear more about you meeting Rabbi Sachs. I listened to his parsha every Friday, read some of his books, heard him speak. What a loss. My heart is broken. We lost two amazing rabbis. Their teachings will go on forever. So my personal reflections on Rabbi Sachs and my meetings with him. So yes, indeed, if you haven't heard, then really one of the great luminaries, I would say perhaps the most brilliant voice that the Jewish world has had this generation, Chief Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, who was the Chief Rabbi of Great Britain for over 10 years. He's an author of, prolific author of
22 years. I'm sorry, Rabbi, 22 years.
22 years. Thank you. He was a prolific author who wrote many, many books on Judaism, but also on its role in the world. And of course, he was also known for his extreme erudite wisdom that combined the most esoteric and also philosophical ideas with Judaism and with the most worldly and even relevant ideas, day-to-day ideas. And he was also a man who was a mensch, a real mensch in so many ways, of the highest character. He was lauded by so many different people. When he passed now this Saturday morning, Shabbat morning, which by the way, the Talmud says that that's when the righteous pass. If someone passes on a Shabbat, then he's kadosh, he's holy. Certainly this reflects the holy man that he was. But when he passed away, many eulogized him from all sorts of backgrounds, all sorts of cultures, all sorts of countries. And that, again, is reflective of the impact that he had in our world. Now, I did have the privilege of meeting him a few times. The last time I actually saw him was at Rabbi Steinsaltz's 80th birthday, 2 years ago. 2 years ago, they had a massive celebration for Rabbi Steinsaltz where Bibi Netanyahu spoke and many other Israeli dignitaries spoke, but Rabbi Sachs also came to speak about Rabbi Steinsaltz. They had a very special friendship, and they shared many things in common. They also had the differences, but that, of course, did not come in the way of the tremendous bond, the heart-to-heart and soul-to-soul connection that they had. It spanned over decades, this friendship that they had. And in fact, Rabbi Sachs himself credits Rabbi Steinsaltz for propelling his Jewish growth and his rabbinic growth more particularly. But I met him then, some 2 years ago, and all of my interactions with him were interactions where I would try and just pick his brains on all sorts of rabbinic matters, leadership matters. But he was also, it's not just the advice that he would give me, but it's also the way in which he would give the advice. He would listen to you fully, be as present as possible, as empathetic as possible, and as kind as possible. So although he was a man of great intellect, he also was able to be as, people of great intellect usually are cold and calculated. But he combined this great intellect with the warmth of his heart and the passion of his soul. That very few are able to do. But more specifically, again, so last time I met him was then, and then I, because we were celebrating Rabbi Steinsaltz, wasn't going to have a sit-down conversation with him, but we did speak about Rabbi Steinsaltz's greatness. It's amazing, as you point out, Rabbi Steinsaltz passed away just 3 months ago, but Rabbi Sachs told me that one of the things he loves most about Rabbi Steinsaltz, and you'd be surprised. I mean, there's a lot of things that he loved about Rabbi Steinsaltz, but it's his chush for music. What's a chush? Chush is a sense for music and for Hasidic tunes more particularly. Now, what's interesting is this, and that is that Rabbi Steinsaltz was a man who couldn't carry a tune. If you heard him sing, it sounded like a record that was off tune. But on the other hand, Rabbi Steinsaltz, that's not what makes a person have a chush for music. Makes a person have a chush for music is a person that can connect not just to the sound of the music, but more importantly to the soul of the music. Now, Rabbi Stein's connected, of course, to the soul of Hasidic music and to the message of Hasidic music, and maybe not so much the melodies of it, of them, but again to what they represented. And Rabbi Sachs was full of admiration towards that. Now it's interesting to note, and that is that both men, Rabbi Steinsaltz and Rabbi Sachs, had their favorite nigun, the favorite Hasidic tune. Now it's fascinating because I think it reflects the greatness of each human being, that both of the nigunim were God-oriented. One, Rabbi Steinsaltz's favorite nigun was a nigun, a Hasidic melody called Pliya, and it quotes really the verse in Psalm 139 that says, "God is everywhere. If I flee to the heavens, there you are. Imisak shamayim shamata. If I go down to the abyss, here you are. God envelops me completely." And there's a Hasidic nigun, a beautiful one, that was Rabbi Steinsaltz's favorite nigun. Rabbi Sachs's favorite nigun was also a Chabad nigun, just like the nigun of Pelia, Rabbi Steinsaltz. And the Chabad nigun was actually the Lubavitcher Rebbe's nigun that he himself composed, called Tzama Lecha Nafshi, which also is based on a verse in Psalms. I think it's Psalm 61, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe 63, it's certainly in the 60s. And Tzama Lecha Nafshi really means that my soul yearns for you like a ram that stands at the riverbank and is thirsty for water. That's how my soul yearns for you. Now, again, both nigunim are God-oriented. By the way, that nigun of Tzama Lecha Nafshi was sung at Rabbi Sachs's funeral on Sunday, and the nigun of Pliya was sung at Rabbi Steinsaltz's funeral 3 months ago. But I think that it's no coincidence that both of these great men had favorite Hasidic nigunim. Again, a subject that Rabbi Sachs and I spoke about the last time I saw him 2 years ago, that were nigunim that were God-oriented, because as much as they were in this world, they knew that they are not of this world, as Rabbi Steins puts it, and that they came from a higher place, and that they have to report and are accountable to a higher power, and that everything that they do is channeled for that higher power, for God himself. They saw themselves as emissaries of God in this world, not of people who were here to indulge in all sorts of self pleasures, or self-oriented goals, but they were here simply as channels of God in this world, and that was reflective, no doubt, in the favorite nigunim that they each had. So anyway, that was my last interaction with Rabbi Sachs. I will say this, that Rabbi Sachs himself, I personally, I mean, beyond his accolades and beyond his achievements, which are many, many and worldly and very, maybe even unparalleled, but beyond that, what I truly, truly admired about Rabbi Sachs is his ability to never, ever look for an opportunity to continue to grow. He was a man who was ignited by the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and we spoke about this, to change his lifestyle altogether. He was a hippie, a philosopher, learning philosophy at Cambridge University. Being a rabbi, becoming a rabbi was the furthest thing away from him. Yet Rabbi Sachs was told by the Lubavitcher Rebbe that maybe you should explore that route. And him, being the ultimate student of self-change, of self-improvement, of self-growth, said, yes, I'll explore that. Now, most people would have said, no, I'm comfortable where I am. I think I have life figured out. This is my route. But he wasn't like that. He knew that to live was to grow. And he always searched for those opportunities to grow and to change from within, to better himself from within. It's no wonder that his favorite joke, and I heard him say this many times, his favorite joke was the bulb joke. You all know the bulb jokes, right? How many rabbis does it take to change a light bulb? How many, whatever, one of the lines is, how many therapists does it take to change a light bulb? And you know what the punchline is? How many therapists does it take to change a light bulb? You could bring as many therapists as you want, but the light bulb needs to want to change. Otherwise, it can't be changed. So that was his favorite joke. That was Rabbi Sachs's favorite joke. But I think, again, it's no coincidence that it's reflective of his own self, that he constantly wanted to change, wanted to better himself. As achieved as he was, as famous as he was, as erudite as he was, as impactful as he was, he always was searching to grow and grow and grow, which to me stands as his ultimate legacy. And if we are to learn anything from Rabbi Sachs beyond these books, beyond his menschlichkeit, beyond his demeanor, it's that constant desire to continue to grow and grow and grow and grow. So that's really the 2 cents that I can shed on of light, that I can shed on this greater than life personality, greater than life holy man, Chief Rabbi Sachs, blessed memory.
I just was thinking about him because, like I said, I've just followed him for years. Isn't it a coincidence that they both died within like 2-3 months? And it's during a corona. I mean, it's like,
yeah,
I don't know.
They didn't die because of the COVID. Let's clarify.
No. I know. But during.
But yeah, look, it's God's ways. I mean, that's God's department. The Talmud says very, very clearly that there are 3 keys in the hands of God. They weren't given to human beings. One of those keys is the key of life and death. God decides who will die, and God decides who will live and who will come into life. That's his department, and we have no understanding in it whatsoever. So yes, the fact that they both died over the same period of time, just 3 months apart, is wondrous. But there's no way any human being can ever understand God's calculations towards that, or towards any life and death issue. Okay, next question. So, dear Rabbi, what are your thoughts on a couple being buried one on top of the other versus side by side? So it's a good question because in many parts of the world, in Israel, I know this has become almost a prevalent custom that people are buried, especially couples, are buried one on top of the other instead of side by side. Now, halachically, let me clarify, both are permitted. But the couples that are buried one on top of the other have to have at least 6 tefachim of separation. What's 6 tefachim? A tefach is about this much. That's a tefach. How many inches is that? Not sure. But 6 tefachim, make the calculation. 6 tefachim of separation. Some say it's only 4 fingers. This is a tefach. Whatever it is. But in any case, 6 tefachim of separation. Now, they do that because they are running out of space. That's why people do that. That's why cemeteries do that. This, having 2 people buried side by side, of course, takes more space. So they bury them one on top of each other. Is there any preference? There is no real preference. In fact, halacha speaks about both examples, and it doesn't give any preference to either one of the examples. But I will say this, and that is that there is maybe a slight advantage actually of being buried one on top of the other, because as the phrase goes, b'chayem u'v'motam lo nifradu, they're both in their lives and in their death, they did not separate from each other. They're always together. And the union seems, of course, much more visible and clear when it is like this, one on top of each other, than maybe like this. So this seems to be more of a unified image than this. So that's that's perhaps one of the advantages. I will say one more thing about this, and couples being buried on top of each other or not, and that is that one has to take into consideration if someone is bothered by it. First, again, there's no halachic requirement whatsoever, but I will say this, that in Arizona, I don't think people are buried on top of each other because there's plenty of room. In other places in the world, there's plenty of room. But if your choice is between being buried in Israel one on top of each other, because I know that in Israel many cemeteries bury that way, because again, there's no space in Israel versus being buried. So if one of your choices is being buried in Israel on top of each other because there's no space in Israel versus being buried outside of Israel, wherever it may be, side by side, because maybe that's what you feel more comfortable with, and always pick Israel over other places in the world. There's a greater merit to be buried in Israel, even if you're uncomfortable with the one on top of each other burial. Now, why? Again, because Israel itself, the land of Israel itself is holy. By the way, points to another interesting difference between the burial outside of Israel and the burial inside of Israel. And that is that in Israel, bodies are buried without a casket. And I'm sure you've seen that. And except for soldiers. And the reason is because soldiers have to be treated all in the same way. Some soldiers, unfortunately, come back from battle not in one piece. So they have to put them in a casket. So to be fair to all soldiers, they put all soldiers in a casket. But if they could, even soldiers would be buried without a casket. Why? Now, outside of Israel, you bury in a casket. Why? Because Israel's land is holy. The soil is holy. So there need not be a separation between your body that is holy and the soil that is holy. Both are holy, so they synchronize with one another. Outside of Israel, the soil is not holy. So you have to be buried in a casket to create the separation between you that is holy and the soil that is not holy. But then again, emphasizes the point that in Israel, yes, they bury like this. And if that's what's holding you back, then don't worry about it, because there's a much greater privilege and merit to be buried in Israel than to be buried outside of Israel, even if that means that outside of Israel, you'll be buried like this.
Rabbi Allouche?
Yes.
I have a question.
Sure.
When you say a soldier is always buried in a casket, does that mean when they're active, or like say he's a soldier and he passes 20 years later?
Yes, yeah, active duty soldiers, you're right.
Okay.
Many years later, no. The veterans are not, yeah.
Just
yeah, good
if
question.
they're in
Yeah.
the idea. Okay.
Okay, next question.
Rabbi, quick follow-up
Yeah.
on the topic of burial in Israel. I think I asked you this once some time ago, and you also mentioned one of the pluses on that is when Moshiach does arrive, and there is the resurrection of the dead, that it occurs first over there.
Right. Yeah, the dead, I mean, according to Maimonides, the dead of Israel will be resurrected first. That's right. Yeah, very good. That's another advantage. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. Irene, I think you wanted to ask another question regarding this.
And I just wanted to say thank you for the answer.
Oh, sure, of course. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Okay. All right, next question. Dear Rabbi, I have a question regarding how much time to wait between dairy and meat. We have been using the rule of 6 hours after meat before dairy and 30 minutes the other way around. I understand this comes from an Ashkenazic tradition, correct? What is the Sephardic approach to time in between the dairy and meat? Does the Talmud clarify that? So it's a great question. So you're right. So halachically, one should wait 6 hours between eating meat and then eating dairy. If you're doing the opposite, you're first eating dairy and then you're eating meat, then all you can do, if it's dairy that's not considered to be hard cheese, and we'll explain what that is soon, then really all you have to do is wash your mouth, make sure that you have no dairy left in your mouth, and then eat meat directly. Of course, in a separate dish, completely separately. Now, why? So the answer given is because there are three separate answers. Answer number one, why do you have to wait for so long between meat and dairy? That is because first, when you eat meat, it takes a long time for the body to digest that meat. And it's simply unhealthy to then eat dairy, which takes, apparently, and the doctors will correct me if I'm wrong, dairy is digested much quicker than meat. And what you are doing is that you are bothering the digestive system that is in the midst of digesting this meat for many hours. and by adding milk to it, and by adding a substance that the digestive system works differently for. And therefore you should wait, as for health reasons, for your digestive system to be able to first digest the meat, and then it can go on and change its way of working for the dairy 6 hours later that you may be eating. The Maimonides speaks of this idea of the digestion system, but Rashi adds another idea, and that is that apparently, I mean, if you don't brush your teeth, I guess, but it takes 6 hours for the meat to dissolve in your teeth. Very often we eat meat and there's teeth stuck in our teeth. So it takes 6 hours to dissolve. And therefore you have to wait 6 hours. Now, you still need both reasons. And that is because if I'm just swallowing meat, or if I'm chewing the meat for a baby, and the baby won't be chewing it, so you could say, well, according to Rashi, it doesn't have to wait. No, you still have Maimonides. And if you are just chewing meat for a baby and you're not swallowing it itself, you can say, well, according to Maimonides, see, I'm not digesting the meat, I'm not eating it. But according to Rashi, you still have to, because you chew the meat. So you still need both reasons. The third idea is more of a Kabbalistic idea. And that is that we have to respect God's creation, the third reason. And God's creation was God created the world in a way that these two things are separated. Meat is meat and milk is milk. And they don't interact with one another. And therefore, we also don't mix them together. Now, that's the mystical reason. By the way, that's also the same reason why we don't eat fish and meat together. Why? Because again, it's to respect God's division in creation. God created the fish below the water. He created the meat above the water. Let's respect that division and not mix the two together. Anyhow, that's to relate to that. Now, I will mention that there is an exception in the Jewish world. That is that if you're a Jew from Holland, so your ancestor, who was one of the great rabbis of Holland some 1,000 years ago, the Maharshal, he says that all you have to do is wait 1 hour. So Jews from Holland, many of them, I know some of them, they only wait 1 hour between eating meat and then dairy. And most Jews don't follow that opinion. So, and I don't know really what it's based on, but that's to answer this question. Okay. Next question right here. Okay, is it true that if you sit at the corner of a table, you may never get married? I was told that from a very young age, but I'm not sure if this is based on Jewish sources. Thank you for clarifying it. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard of the superstition that if you sit at the corner of the table, you'll never get married. Has anyone heard of that? Yeah, you can raise your hand. All right, well.
I have. It's
okay.
Bubermantzers.
So,
it's
all right,
Buberman.
the question is if it's true, if it's based on Jewish sources. So look, a lot of these ideas are pure superstitions. Like, what if I bumped into a black cat? I think that's another one. Is that a bad omen, as they say? What if I walk under a ladder? Is that a bad omen? So no, all these are superstitions that come from outside religions that have nothing to do with Jewish sources. But I will say this, let's develop this idea and think about it intellectually. If you sit at the corner of a table, now I will say this, is it bad for marriage? So if you are sitting at the corner of a table because the sides of the table are already taken and you're trying to be a good sport and compromise and say, you know what, I'll compromise my comfort for everyone to be able to be seated comfortably, then you're an excellent candidate for marriage. It just proves the point, the opposite point. Now, if you're seated at the corner of a table because you're an indecisive person, you don't know exactly where to sit and you still haven't made up your mind, so you're sitting at the corner of the table, then you're a terrible candidate for marriage, because every marriage demands a leap of faith. You have to jump into it at one point, and you can't be indecisive. Yes, you need ground rules and so on, and we spoke about this a lot. But if it reflects your indecisiveness, so intellectually speaking, you don't need the superstition for that. intellectually speaking, then maybe you're not yet ready to get married. Okay. Next question. All right. So, dear Rabbi, with all of the anti-Semitism and terror around the world today, my husband and I were discussing ways to keep our home safe. I lean more towards spirituality than he does. So I say that we need to get our mezuzahs and make sure that we have them on every door. He says that we should get our alarm system checked and make sure we have sensors on every window. But you can have all, I say you can have all the alarms in the world, and in the end, it just boils down to having faith. And if we have faith, aren't mezuzahs good enough? So it's a great question, and I love the way you asked the question. Most questions I get is, if I have my alarm system on, do I really need mezuzahs? You're asking the opposite question. If I have mezuzahs, do I really need an alarm system? So really, I'll tell you the story of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, the holiest man in the world, who would tell very often people to check the mezuzahs when they had illnesses or thieveries and things like that in their homes. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe, each and every night, it's known, before going to sleep, he would make sure that every window of his home was completely closed. Now, why is that? He was the holiest man in the world. I'll tell you why. Because he was the holiest man in the world living in Brooklyn, New York. And he realized that we need to partner with God in securing ourselves, in bringing those blessings that we desire for ourselves. We can't wait for them just to fall upon us. So both you and your husband are right. Yes, you need an alarm system. Yes, you may need sensors on every window. I don't know what neighborhood you live in, so maybe that's the case. And you need mezuzahs too. You need both elements, because I think it boils down to the very essence of faith. Faith in Judaism is not naivete, not being gullible. Faith in Judaism is, I've done everything I could. I've exhausted all of my personal, individual, intellectual, practical options. Then I say, okay, now God, you do the rest. That's what faith is in Judaism. And therefore, when it comes particularly to your life, yes, absolutely, your husband is right, get one. And you are right too. And then you do your part also in inviting God into the picture, and put mezuzahs on every doorpost, except, by the way, the bathroom doorpost, and rooms that have no walking room in them also. But otherwise, really, that's the idea of combining both faith and practical action, both the mezuzahs and the alarm system, or dare I say, both the body and the soul, and then God can come into the picture and do the rest. As they say, the famous expression is, we have to do our best and God will do the rest. It rhymes also. So it's a cute little line, but it certainly reflects what faith means and what you should do.